Hey, Al Scott here, inviting you to check out Modern Times Magazine at moderntimesmagazine.com. It's a great little independent publication out of Phoenix, Arizona, featuring unique views on economics, politics, foreign policy, sports, and music, with great art scene coverage and fiction writing as well. That's Modern Times Magazine at moderntimesmagazine.com.
All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton, your radio man here. ScottHorton.org is my website, and you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at /Scott Horton Show. And next up is our old friend Pat Buchanan. Welcome back to the show, Pat. How are you doing?
Doing fine, Scott.
Very good. Pat, he's the author of Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War, and a lot of other great books. You all know that. He writes for creators, but you can find all of his foreign policy stuff at antiwar.com/Pat. The latest is, will Boehner stop our rogue president? Well, will he or not?
Well, I haven't heard from Boehner that he's going to call the House back into session, but that's exactly what he ought to do, Scott. The president has no authority to launch this war. Syria hasn't attacked us or threatened us, and there's no urgency to attacking him whatsoever. And in the absence of any such attack, the president has no authority to launch a war on a state like Syria, and the only institution in the United States under the Constitution which has the authority to take us to war is the Congress of the United States, and Mr. Boehner should call the House back into order and debate and decide on whether or not we should go to war.
I was going to say there real quick, do you know the CNN reporter, is it Dana Bash or Dana Bash? I keep saying it wrong, I think.
I think it's Dana Bash.
Dana Bash, okay. I saw her report yesterday on CNN International. I'm not sure if they wrote it up, but she reported, and I believe it was White House sources, candidly admitting that Obama did not want a congressional vote because he was quite afraid that he would lose it, like Cameron lost in the UK, and that then he would lose face. And so he would rather just go ahead on, and I guess as long as he has the leadership of the opposition party in the House on board with him, he can do that, right? As you say, it's up to Boehner to stop him, and he won't.
Well, exactly. Look, the President of the United States has no authority to take us to war. He does not have that power under the Constitution. He knows that. He said so in the past, as has Vice President Biden, who said it would be an impeachable act to launch a war without the authorization of Congress. Now, I understand why the president, who's got egg all over his face for having foolishly drawn a red line in the sand, he had no authority to draw. I can understand why he doesn't want to go to the Congress. But that does not explain why John Boehner does not call the Congress back into a session and assert his right as Speaker of the House, one of the two houses that decides on war. And the question for conservatives is, where is John Boehner, and why is he not back here in Washington calling the House into session?
Right. Well, do you think that Obama is right to be afraid that he would lose the vote?
I think there would be very serious doubt on my part that the Congress, those members, would stand up and authorize a war. I think what they would do is demand more information, which they should rightly do, because my honest belief is that, first, I don't think Assad ordered this. I find that impossible to believe. He's got nothing to gain. Secondly, this thing has all the earmarks of a false flag operation.
Elaborate on that point. What makes you say so?
Well, who benefits from this attack? Cui bono, in the old Latin phrase. The one that benefits is not going to be Assad. He's going to be hit by the United States. And it's not going to be the United States which will be dragged into war. Who would want to drag the United States into a war with Syria? Who would benefit from such a war? Obviously, Al-Qaeda, elements of the rebels. The Saudis want a war. There are others, even in this country, who would like to see a war as a backdoor to war on Iran. I don't say those folks are responsible, but they are seizing upon this episode to drive us to war. And Mr. Boehner has the authority to call the Congress back into session, and they have the right, the obligation, the duty to debate and decide. That decision does not rest with President Obama.
Right. Well, now, Because in theory and practice, or not in theory, but in practice, it really does. Since Truman, it is up to the president. And when he says things like, I have not decided yet, he doesn't get laughed right out of court. I guess maybe we're getting a little bit better on these issues after the last decade here, but it really kind of is up to him. And yet it seems like he's pretty reluctant to do this. He and Hillary Clinton and Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff Dempsey and many others this whole time. I don't know if John Kerry's ever done a very good job on this, but his predecessor certainly was good at explaining why not to back the rebels, why not to intervene in the war, even as the Obama administration really has been backing them for the last couple of years in some ways and helping the Saudis back them and that kind of thing. But as far as outright intervention, they've really explained very well why they haven't intervened more. Do you think that maybe Obama doesn't really want to do this?
I think he's ambivalent. He realizes that he put his credibility on the line with that foolish statement about a red line, and he fears that maybe Assad has crossed it and is defying him and is making a fool out of him. At the same time, I mean, looking at the situation, he and all the rest of them have said, look, there's nothing in this war for the United States. Let me take up your issue of Harry Truman. That was a case of an attack across the demilitarized zone in which Americans were being killed almost from day one. In other words, we were caught in a war situation. You are right, Harry Truman called it a police action, but the Congress came back and authorized money to fight the war. With Reagan on Grenada, for example, and I was there then, he moved quickly because there was a real danger Americans were going to be taken hostage by these new Marxist thugs, which took over from Maurice Bishop, the old Marxist thug, all of a sudden. And the same with the attack on Libya. I wrote that speech for President Reagan, and the reason for that was retaliation for what they had done in Berlin, and we had to maintain the element of surprise. But there's no argument for launching. I mean, everybody knows the president has said how many missiles almost we're going to fire, where they're going to go, how long it's going to last. There is no element of surprise here. There is no threat. There is no attack. And so the Congress and Syria will be there in a week or 2 weeks. So Congress should be called back to deliberate as long as they want on this war.
Well, so what should the American people do in this case? Just call their congressman, send them an email, or go down there and bang on the damn door? Or what do we do to stop this war? It's not too late yet, kind of.
Well, don't go bang on the door because some of them are off at the beach or abroad or some junket. But I will say this. They should send emails to their congressman. They should make phone calls there and make a simple case of it. Say, look, if we're going to go to war, we don't agree with it, but if you're going to take us to war, debate it, decide it, and vote for that war. The idea that you're going to let the president take us to war while you're sitting off there on vacation and then you won't hold him accountable is an abject dereliction of duty on your part. And if Boehner won't call you back, you tell Boehner to come back and call you back or we're going to get a new leader.
You spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C. Don't any of these congressmen and senators feel at all the weight of the fact that this is the history of the world being written here and they're supposed to have some responsibility in this? Or is it all just a junket?
Well, Scott, I'll tell you, I not only spent a long time in Washington, I was born there. My father was born there. I was there when it was a nice town, an old southern town, and during World War II. And it has changed dramatically. The problem with the Congress, I think, and with the Republican Party, the problem with the Congress is this. They really don't want responsibility. They really don't want to be held accountable, and they transfer responsibility over many decisions. They let the Supreme Court strip them of authority to decide issues of racial integration, of right to life, of gay rights, of everything. They just let the Supreme Court seize all this terrain from them, and they let the president capture terrain from them. I've worked in 3 White Houses, and presidents will try to seize terrain from Congress. It is the duty of the Congress to defend its constitutional responsibilities. The Congress is the first branch of government. Article 1 of the Constitution, the longest section. And yet they let presidents and others seize their power. You know why? They don't want to be held responsible for the decisions. This, I think, is what's behind Boehner and Reid and the rest of them. They're saying, look, we don't want to have to vote on this war. If we vote suppose we vote against it and he goes to war and he's a hero, we'll look like fools. I mean, I remember talking to a famous U.S. senator who voted against the war to rescue Kuwait, and he lost. He never ran for president because of it. And so they don't want to make these decisions, but leaders do. A real leader will go in there, a real Speaker of the House, Tom Reed, will walk in there and see this as an opportunity to stop this war.
All right, now, let me ask you this, because the polls came out and said that 9% of Americans answering their telephone for pollsters that evening were willing to say that they support this thing. The sentiment being, let them Syrians work out their own problems, wherever that is, I think, at this point. We've been through enough. We put the world through enough, and that's now the consensus. There's no anti-war movement in the street, but now it's the whole country. But so then that leaves the question, whose war?
Whose war is very simple. It's Obama's war. It would be. It's the neocons' war. They've got another one of those letters you've seen that we had the PNAC letter before the war in Iraq. They all get all the signatures of the think tankers and the others who want this war, and they are pushing for an attack there. You see the Israeli lobby and Israel want an attack here because out of this war can almost certainly come, or will almost certainly come, a collision with Syria's main supporter, Iran, and many people want that war. There are people in Washington and Israel and Saudi Arabia and Syria and a lot of places that want the United States dragged into war for their ends. But it is the duty of Americans looking out for their own country first to decide whether or not it is in the national interest of the United States. And anyone who looks at this from a cold national interest standpoint of the United States, including Barack Obama up to now, has said, stay out.
Hey, do you think if it was you and Nixon up there right now that he would go and shake hands with the Ayatollah and work things out like he did with Mao Zedong?
I think, I'm not sure about shaking. I don't think the Ayatollah would shake hands with any of us. I don't think he likes us. But would I say, I would tell you what I would do. I would get 2 or 3 of the toughest diplomats and generals I know, and I would send them over to talk to the Iranians and say, let's work this thing out on this nuclear thing. And here's our bottom line, and we see your bottom line. And I think we've got some common ground. And I think the idea of something like that, a détente or an entente with Iran, is something that is eminently achievable. I mean, Iran is hostile to the United States, but the hostility and the enormity of that country is nothing compared to what China was. When I went over there with Nixon and I shook hands with Zhou Enlai, and he went over and met Mao Zedong.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, well, of course, as you know, the Leverets, Flint Leverett and Hillary Mann Leverett, that's their analogy. They say we need a Nixon goes to China kind of a moment here. I guess it's much harder for a Democrat to do so, although I don't...
I agree with you. I think that's because I think if you look at the interests, now clearly there are interests in conflict between the United States and Iran, but neither of us wants a war with the other, I believe. Both of us want the Persian Gulf kept open. Iran wants to regenerate its economy and move back into the community of nations. We have no problem with that. I mean, we don't want them to have nuclear weapons, and they want to have a nuclear program. I think there's common ground there if we get intrusive inspections, and I think they're willing to do that. So there's an awful lot of common ground as well as conflict, and that is natural and normal among powers that, have ideological differences and disagreements. But I agree with you. I don't see a war as serving the interests of anyone here except for the people that want to see Iran destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like clearly the population of Iran and the government of Iran are fiercely determined to maintain their independence from us. But if they have it, it doesn't seem like it costs us very much. There's still a fourth-rate power with 1/10 of of our GDP every year, and that's without the sanctions. And, the biggest benefit going for them is our war in Iraq that we did for them, so we can't really resent them that much for their gain and influence, from that.
Well, right. They were anti-Taliban, and we knocked over the Taliban. They were anti-Saddam, and we knocked over Saddam and brought the Shiites to power. And so there's, I think that given the United States, which really, there are interests we have in the Persian Gulf and the Middle East, and I think we can do a deal with the Iranians. I have no doubt about it. Now, ideologically, given the Ayatollah and they're anti-Western and the rest of it, it's going to be problematic, but it was problematic with Mao Zedong as well. And so I think something can be worked out, my friend.
All right, now, when it comes to the neocons and this whole, hey, America, fight all Israel's enemies type of a policy here, I wonder do you find them to be just very rigid ideologues where they just can't change their mind about things or something like that? Because it seems like, I can understand in the era that the clean break policy was written, that David Wimser and them were sitting around telling each other, wow, we sure are smart for coming up with this great idea for regime change and everything or whatever. But now that we've seen the practice of it, like we just talked about, handing Iraq or, 2/3 of it over to Iran, that kind of thing, can't they reevaluate this policy and think, well, you know what, we do have America, the most powerful force in the world ever here, maybe we could make some kind of peace and détente with our Arab neighbors and work things out, whatever. Why do they persist on this folly, this Ladin doctrine of turning the Middle East into a boiling cauldron? It doesn't seem to make much sense, even from an Israeli-centric point of view,
Well, let's see. I think that is, if you take the point of view of Netanyahu, he doesn't speak without mentioning the mortal threat to the United States from intercontinental ballistic missiles in Iran and nuclear weapons, toward which they've been moving, says Netanyahu, since 1992, racing. They've never gotten there. But the truth is that the neocons have got one foot in reality, and many of them were my allies or our allies during the Cold War. They have one foot in reality, but the other foot, I think, is in the air. And this reflexive desire to use American power to smash any and all Arab countries or Muslim countries that somehow down the road may threaten Israel. And it is clearly there, and you can see the thread run through their policies continually. Look at the list of people signing that letter. Some of them are, gay rights liberals signing up there, and others of them are neocons, and they all, what do they have in common?
The settler movement?
Well, some of them, I'm sure, disagree with the settlements, but there are disagreements among the neocons. For example, on Egypt, some of them think we ought to cut off aid to Egypt, and others of them, following the Israeli line, say no, that we ought to stick with the army. And my view is, I think we got no choice now, given the fact that it's a fight to the death, apparently, between the Brotherhood and the military in power. You've got to deal with them. We've got to deal with the world as it is, not as we would wish it to be.
Well, can't we just take a hands-off policy toward Egypt until this works out and let them work it out instead of choosing sides there? Neither side's going to close the Suez Canal to us, right?
Well, then, as Sarah Palin said, let Allah work it out. Let Allah sort them out.
Yeah, or, let them have their street battles if that's what they have to have until it settles down. Somebody's going to win out eventually, It's sort of the same thing in Syria. It's a horrible thing, and of course, the war party always claims a monopoly on morality and foreign policy, that, if this is a humanitarian war, to oppose it is to not care about what happens to Syrians, basically. Well, that's their position.
Well, before they had this casus belli, their position, many of them, was to stay out. But it is now a golden opportunity to get us into this war, and beyond that, into a war with Iran, which is one of the main supporters of Syria. But listen, Scott, I'm going to have to get going now.
Okay, right on. Well, thanks very much for your time, Pat. I appreciate it.
Okay, right. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, everybody. That was Pat Buchanan. I was really running out of questions for him anyway. But that's a good deal. You can find him at antiwar.com/Pat.
Why does the U.S. support the tortured dictatorship in Egypt? Because that's what Israel wants. Why can't America make peace with Iran? Because that's not what Israel wants. And why do we veto every attempt to shut down illegal settlements on the West Bank? Because it's what Israel wants. Seeing a pattern here? Sick of it yet? It's time to put America first. Support the Council for the National Interest at councilforthenationalinterest.org and push back against the Israel lobby and their sock puppets in Washington, D.C. That's councilforthenationalinterest.org.
So you're a libertarian, and you don't believe the propaganda about government awesomeness you were subjected to in 4th grade. You want real history and economics. Well, learn in your car from professors you can trust with Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom. And if you join through the Liberty Classroom link at scotthorton.org, we'll make a donation to support The Scott Horton Show. Liberty Classroom, the history and economics they didn't teach you.
Hey, all, Scott here, hawking stickers for the back of your truck. They've got some great ones at LibertyStickers.com. Get your son killed, Jeb Bush, 2016. FDR, no longer the worst president in American history. The National Security Agency, blackmailing your congressman since 1952. And USA, sometimes we back Al-Qaeda, sometimes we don't. And there's over 1,000 other great ones on the wars, police, state, elections, the Federal Reserve, and more at LibertyStickers.com. They'll take care of all your custom printing for your band or your business at thebumpersticker.com. LibertyStickers.com. Everyone else's stickers suck. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for WallStreetWindow.com. Mike Swanson is a successful former hedge fund manager whose site is unique on the web. Subscribers are allowed a window into Mike's very real main account and receive announcements and explanations for all his market moves. The Federal Reserve has been inflating the money supply to finance the bank bailouts and terror war overseas. So Mike's betting on commodities, mining stocks, European markets, and other hedges against our depreciating dollar. Play along on paper or with real money, and then be your own judge of Mike's investment strategies. See what happens at WallStreetWindow.com. Hey everybody, Scott Horton here for The Future Freedom, the Journal of the Future Freedom Foundation at fff.org/subscribe. Now, you know, they publish great articles at fff.org every day, but their best stuff goes in The Future of Freedom. It's just $25 a year for the print edition, $15 to read it online, and I got a new one coming out in September in there, U.S. Responsible for Somalia's Misery. Support FFF. Sign up for The Future of Freedom at fff.org/subscribe. And tell them Scott sent you.